Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the third session of the Intro to Starry Night. We're gonna just keep going the speed that we were doing yesterday. We ended with the display options, but we'll start with a pop quiz here. What are the 5 basic functions of Starry Night that I mentioned a couple of times yesterday? You either answer, you can speak it, or you can chat it, either one.
I have to write them down to make sure I've got them.
Notes are good. So we have orientation, time. Yep, 2 out of 3. What was the first thing?
Time advancement.
Time advancement, time rate. Yep. Yeah, very good. Yep, display options. Good.
Missing the easiest one.
Location. There we go. Yep. So we have where you are, when you
Place,
are,
time,
the rate.
lapse rate,
There we go.
display
Found your
options.
Perfect. All right, great. So we're gonna jump back into the display options, which is where we ended yesterday. So we're gonna go ahead and share the worksheet with you. If you don't have it, it's the which one is it? Number 7, view options. I have what we have it labeled as. So thank you, Steve.
No problem.
So go ahead and kind of start working through that. If you have questions on it, either bring it up, unmute yourself and ask. You can chat to everyone. You can chat to myself, Steve, or Dan is here with us again as a proctor. Thank you, Dan. So you can private message any of us, general chat, or kind of unmute yourself if you have questions. But I'll give you a few minutes to kind of go through here and see if you can finish these up, and then we'll go through it as a group afterwards.
So I think I've got everything done except for I have some things that are labeled that are in red that were already there. And I think we talked about shutting those off yesterday.
We did, and what we'll do today is we'll shut them off again, and then I'll show you how to permanently keep them off.
Okay, good
Yep.
deal.
Thanks for bringing that up, though.
In that case, I think it might be a good time for me to start going through some of this stuff. So I'm going to share my screen now. Hopefully you all can see my pre-flight. So here we go. Horizons and daylight, press the home button. Again, I like to always go back to home. It's a good place to start. Change the horizon panorama to Goblin Valley using the options side tab. So I want to go into my options on the horizon panoramas. If you remember, they live under your options. And this is something I do quite often. I try to give examples of stuff that I do in the planetarium at least once a show, and people will always like to see different places. Now, remember, Brad kind of went through this. You have your default, which is what you're going to see if it doesn't have a background panorama. Your location, that's if you have something already set up for that area. And then your document, that means you can change it on the fly and it's not going to save it. You can just kind of have fun with it. So I'm going to click on that and I'm going to search for Goblin Valley. They're in alphabetic order, which makes it nice. As long as I can remember the alphabet. Find Goblin Valley. I'm going to select it. Now, I don't know if you guys can see this on your machines, but something that is nice, it does show up here on your pre-flight, but on your render box, until you hit OK, it won't show up on the dome. So if you hit the wrong thing by accident, you still have a second to save it before the audience will see it. So that's a nice little saving grace there. So hit OK, and now your audience would see Goblin Valley. I say turn the daylight off. Now, I don't know if we taught you guys this, but easy way to do daylight, just find daylight right here. As Dan Zielinski will attune, he loves hotkeys. And so a hotkey is just what can you press on the keyboard to make this happen. And I think Brad did this yesterday. I'm not 100%, but it's Control D. So if you just press Control D, it's your quick little way to turn daylight on and off. You can do that with a couple things.
Awesome.
What was that, Dan?
Hotkeys are awesome.
That's why everyone calls you Hot Hands.
That's right. I know all the hotkeys.
Yeah, I have a little app on my phone that tests me so I can one day beat you in quickness, but I'm not there yet. And I always like to ask, what is actually being turned on and off when daylight's being checked? And it's, if you notice, when I turn daylight on and off, it's not getting rid of the sun. So it's not like that's going away. It's actually just getting rid of the Earth's atmosphere. So I always like to tell my audience that everyone's dead now, but that gets me in trouble. Okay, next I say, let's go to the local guides. Turn on the grid for the meridian and turn on the grid and the meridian under the Alt as dropdown. So what you have to do is I go find, there's a whole bunch of dropdowns here under guides. And you can see there's an Alt add guides. And I'm going to click on that and it will give me a dropdown. And then all I have to do is find the grid and the meridian. And there you go. So that's how you put those up, just by those little toggles. And you can change this. I think I know Brad talked about this yesterday. You can change all kinds of things here to size of the lines, all kinds of stuff. So feel free to play around with that. And finally, the constellations. I ask you to turn on the labels and the stick figures. So constellations. Now, something that I do, it depends on how much you use Starball. I like to put my constellations in this little thing right here, which is exactly the same as your constellations right here with a couple extra features. It's just something that I do, makes it a little quicker and easier. But I ask you to turn on your labels. That's busy. And your stick figures. And that's pretty busy too. And I always like to ask what constellation the sun is in, because 9 times out of 10, I get a lot of people who want to know their horoscope when they come visit me. And then I can tell them why they don't want to know their horoscope, but that's just me. So anyway, hopefully that helped you guys get a little refresher on the options pane. Remember, options are really important when you're coming down to how you want to set up a scene and save a favorite. And if you don't like all this stuff being on your screen, press the home button and it gets you back to a good place. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Brad and stop sharing.
All right, thank you, Steve. So we're going to stick with display options just a little bit longer here to look into how, if you want to change what your default options are when you go home, how do you go about doing that? So got my pre-flight up here. And let me just tweak it a little bit. So display options, we have them over here. Hopefully they're becoming a little bit familiar, or at least, oh, daylight on, off, planets, moons, or go into the extra options, that kind of stuff. But let's say you have some labels that are on and you want them to always be off, right? I believe most of you, it was probably fixed if you went down to the NGIC database. So under deep space, NGCIC database, and turning labels off here, that probably turned the labels off for most of you. If not, let me know. So if you check that off, what we want now, because if we hit home, you'll know, if you hit home and go ahead, what you'll notice is the labels will come back on. Or if you shut Starry Night down and launch it later, then they'll come back up, because what you did is you just temporarily changed the option. But as soon as you home your system or load a favorite or turn Starry Night off and back on, it gets reset to whatever the default option is. So if you want to change this permanently, then you want to change what your default options are, because it's just a file that Starry Night reads, so it resets everything the proper way. So if you hit home before, then go back and uncheck labels for the NGIC database, make sure that they're off, it's the way that you want it. And then what we want to do is go up to the options menu, the very top here, click on that. And then about halfway down is save current options as default. So we'll click on that. It'll pop up a window and it's basically saying, are you sure? Because if you hit save, it's going to go through all of your display options, and whatever the state is for each one of those, that's going to become the new default option. So I only changed, you probably only changed one thing, the labels. So we're going to hit save. And now if you hit home, the labels should stay off. Now the thing to be careful about with display options is anything else that you might have changed in addition to what you also really want changed, if you don't change it back, that will become your new default option. So let's say, like with Dan, we had gone through and we still had daylight turned off. And then I went and turned the labels off, and then I said save these as default options. Daylight off will become your new default option. So if we do that, I turn daylight off here, and then I say save as default, save. It's now gone through here, save these all as default options. And if I say home, daylight's off. Because daylight on or off is a display option, right? So I would have to go back and turn it back on in order for daylight to show up again. Let's see if Starry Night liked me clicking so much. It probably didn't. So that's just something to be aware of. So what I usually recommend if you're changing your default options is to play around, see what you like, get things the way you like, but then always home your system, because that will reset everything. Then change only what you want to change. There we go. I woke up. Then change only what you want to change and save that as default options. That way there's nothing you did 15, 20 minutes ago that you forgot about that you're accidentally saving as your default option. So if you home the system and only change what you want, then it's much less likely that you're going to get some surprise in the middle of your show. Make sense? So hopefully everyone's labels are off now. And if you went through that and you saved that as your default option, those shouldn't come back again ever. All right. Next thing I'm going to talk about, and we're just going to go through this one kind of quickly because we don't actually have an exercise for this one, but the starball controls here, these were originally put in to mimic the motions that you had with an optomechanical star projector, like the old, like Spitz A3P or whatever, the big ball in the center of the room kind of a deal. And so this is one of the biggest differences between the desktop version of Starry Night. Because if you're not familiar with Starry Night, there is a desktop version. There are actually several desktop versions. A lot of them geared towards different grade levels. And one of the biggest differences between them, apart from the layout, is the starball control functionality. This is in the planetarium version. It just doesn't exist in the desktop version. And you have the motions that you would have with the old optomechanical system. So what they could do is the ball itself, where all the stars are coming out, it could spin, and that would simulate time flow, and that's daily motion. And I could start that, and what we'll see is the sun just start to slowly move across the sky there. It could do latitude motion, so the entire assembly could just like move up and down, and that would simulate you moving north and south latitude. So I could move north, and we'll see the sun gets lower in the sky. Come back. Annual motion, it would move the sun, the planets and stuff to simulate very fast time flows, so you could watch the planets move through the stars. And so we have that option here as well. And then I'm going to skip longitude. And then heading here is basically just takes the whole thing and spins it. So you notice my entire view down here is now just spinning around. Right? So that's what those are for. There are some use cases that you might get out of these, like latitude, for example, in a show if you want to move north or south and show how the stars are different. Like, hey, tonight, what if we just move to the North Pole? How would the stars change? You could go there, like we did yesterday. You could change your location, or you could just use the latitude and move north and south quickly if you wanted to. So there are a few use cases that you might get from these. But some of them, like daily motion, time flow is a much better way of doing that. All right, so what we'll look at now. Oh yeah, I didn't say daylight on as my new default option. See, that is the trouble that you can get into. All right. So anyone has questions on Starball controls, or you want a little bit more information about that, chat us up in the window, and we can help you out there. But what I want to spend a little bit of time on now is the window over here that's labeled planets. And this is kind of a multifunctional window, because this is, at least for myself and a lot of people I know, this is where we interact with individual objects in Starry Night. So if we want to turn on like a single constellation, or we want to put the orbit on for a planet, or we want to label a moon, this is where we can do that in Starry Night. So you'll notice that the default list of objects that it gives you are the planets, and it's the solar system objects. So we have the sun. I know the sun's not a planet. And then we have Mercury, asteroids, all the way out to comets if we scroll down. So basically everything in the solar system is here for you to kind of have easy access to, because most of the time, if you're doing it kind of a general sky talk, you're going to want to interact with objects in the solar system. Especially when it comes to putting an orbit on or labeling them or things like that. So that's why we kind of have that as the default list there. And in a little bit, I'll show you, you can make this whatever you want. You can have this show you constellations. This is actually a search field, so I could delete planets and search for any individual object that I want. So we'll do some of that a little bit later. But for now, we're just going to get used to how this works with using the planets here. So the very first box here, you see it here, and you'll notice that there's a box, and then there are some circles and some numbers and whatnot. There are a whole bunch of columns, a lot of information this can display here. The very first one here, for any object, no matter what you're looking at here, this is going to be the selection checkbox. So I select that, and it's basically going to turn that object on. So it's going to label like the sun and the planets. If it's a constellation, this checkbox will turn that constellation on, and so forth. So if I want to label Mercury, I just check that, and Mercury is labeled there. So the first one here, if you want it, turn it on or off, or label it here. That's what this box is for. The other ones here, because there are so many options that you have here, especially on laptops, we don't actually say what they are in the column headings. It's way too small of an area. But all you have to do is hover over them, and it will tell you exactly what the option is. So if I want to put the orbit of Mercury on, for example, all I have to do is check that, and it might be a little bit faint, so I can turn the daylight off. But now we have the orbit of Mercury around the sun there. Orbit of Venus, same thing. Check that, and we get the orbit of Venus. And then turn them off, we just uncheck both. All right, so any of these toggle boxes that you have here, just hover over it, and it will tell you what it does. So some of the useful ones, orbit, orbit trail, you probably don't have at the moment. You'll be getting that after Institute. Shadow cones, we won't talk about. That's if you want to talk about eclipses. It will actually highlight the umbra and penumbral shadow cones for you. Local path can be very useful. In fact, I'm going to set the local path for the sun. I'm going to turn that on. And I am going to move time forward. So I'm going to go up to the time rate section. And if I want to have the sun trace out an enema, so instead of just moving through the sky, I want it to actually leave behind some kind of trail of breadcrumbs. That's what the local path is for. So I'm going to set it to days. And now the sun is slowly going through the course of an analemma there for you. Now, does anyone have an idea why it did all this crazy stuff before it started actually doing it in correct days, correct units? We mentioned it briefly yesterday. Next to the time options, like the play, stop, and whatever, this 1, that's your ramp up speed. So when I said play for days, Starry Night ramped up to days. So it did portions of a day. So the sun went all crazy before it started doing what I actually wanted it to do. So if you're using these discrete time steps, you always want this value here to be 0. Otherwise you get crazy stuff. Make sense? So now if I hit stop or I hit play, it behaves the way I want it to. Make sense?
You did have a hand up earlier.
Question? Yeah.
He put it in the chat now.
Oh, okay. Yes, we are going to get to how you can display what your options are in the find window. Yes. Yeah, everyone's is probably a little bit different here. In fact, we'll cover that right now. At the very top here, just right click anywhere, on name or CineMajor or whatever you have, the kind of darker row at the top here. And anything that's checked will display in your window. Anything that's unchecked is not there. So if I want to add on the distance to the objects from where I'm at, I select that, and now that column is added there. If I want it to go away, I just uncheck it, and it goes away. So yeah, so you can kind of fine tune exactly how you want this displayed. So if you're doing a lesson or a show and you don't want to be distracted by a whole bunch of options that you're not going to use, just turn them all off, and then you only have what you want for that particular show. Does that answer your question, Rick? Good.
Yes.
All right. So just a little bit more about the local path, just because this is a useful feature. This is also how you can look at retrograde motion with planets. So if I were to, say, turn it off for the sun and turn it on for, we'll just do Mercury. And in this case, I want to switch to sidereal days. And if you have questions on why I'm using specific time steps here, you can ask in the chat, and any of us can easily answer that for you. But if I hit play now, then we're going to see Mercury leave behind this trail of breadcrumbs, just like the sun was doing. And right there, we got a little bit of retrograde motion. Right? And you can actually see that due to the path that it left behind. Now, let's say you don't want the dates on there. You just want to see the path. Then to change the options for that, we turn it on over here in the planets window, the options to change are actually up here, the options menu. We select that and we go take a look at orbit and path options. And this is where you can change how it's drawing the path that it's leaving. So if you want to change the color, that's here. If you want it to leave markers or not, that's there. If you want the date and time to appear, which I don't, I'll turn that off and it goes away. So all these options are here. The length of the path, so the longer the length there, the more dots you'll get, or the longer the line will be. So get it set the way you want, and I can go back and hit play, and it'll go back to doing its thing. So that's kind of an important point, that turning it on or off. Like I turned the individual path on for Mercury over here, but what's setting the options, that's still part of the options. So it's either going to be set in the options window here or the options menu, because these will change these options for the entire group. So like if I went and turned the local path on for the sun now, even though the sun's not there, it would leave behind the same type of trail that Mercury is. Make sense? Okay. So local pathing, like I said, that's one that you may find yourself using quite a bit. Hide is another very useful option here. Yeah, so yeah, options, very good question. Options are saved into favorites. Right? So any options that you go through here, you turn the path on for Mercury, you turn constellations on, any of these things will get saved into your favorite. And when you load the favorite, you'll see exactly what you want until you hit home, in which case, they all get reset to the default values. So yeah, anything that can be saved into the favorite, which are all of your options here, with a few exceptions that we're not going to get into. But options get saved into your favorites. They're also the same thing that you can go through and set default options. So they're basically the same thing. So anything that you can save it into a favorite, you can set a default option for, and vice versa. Hide is great if you don't want something distracting your audience. So let's say we're looking at the motions of the planets, and so we have time moving very, very quickly. The moon is going to quickly become very distracting. The moon's going to be zipping by insanely fast, and so to not have your entire class distracted, because if they're under the age of about 18, all they're going to focus on is the moon zipping by. All you would have to do is go to the moon, check hide, and now the moon is not going to be displayed up there anymore. So hide is a really useful thing to kind of like you say, you don't want to hide all the planets and moons. So if you wanted all the planets and moons to go off, I would just go over to display options and turn off planets and moons, right? But if I just want individual ones to turn off, I'd say, okay, I don't want to see the moon and some other things maybe. So make sense? All right. Last one we'll play with at the moment, and Mars should be up there. Oh, little piece of information. Starry Night, it tries to be smart, and things that if you're on a planet, you're on the surface, anything that's currently visible above the horizon should display as kind of a lighter color. Anything that's below the horizon should be a little bit dimmer. So if you're wondering why are some things a little dimmer than others, that's Starry Night's way of trying to tell you what's above the horizon and what's not. Once you get into space, all bets are off, because you can all turn around and see anything. So, but when you're on the surface of a planet or a moon or something, that's Starry Night's way of telling you, hey, you can see it right now or you can't. So for Mars here, Mars is there. I can label Mars. That's great. But let's say I'm giving a sky talk and I just want to briefly show the audience Mars. I don't want to fly there. I don't want to worry about having an image of Mars ready to display or whatnot. I just want to say, hey, look at Mars, and then we're done. That's what the magnification slider here is for. So if I just enlarge Mars and turn that off for the moment. Suddenly Mars is nice and big and we can see it. And on your render box view, Preflight does this instantly. Your render box view should actually, animate the enlargement. So it should, slowly get big, slowly get small. And so it's a great way of just making it big, talking about it. Hey, here's what it would look like through a telescope without zooming in on it or anything. We'll get to zooming in a little bit. But if you just want to say, hey, here's what it looks like, big, boom, exactly, everyone's excited, we're done, bring it back down, and you're good to go. So that's what the magnification slider is for. And if you want a little bit more room, you can actually, up at the header, click and expand that. So if you want a little bit more, finer control over exactly how much you're magnifying it, you can expand the column there. So questions on just kind of interacting with the planets, kind of the basics here. Because we're going to do, I think I just want to cover a couple more things, and then we have another exercise. So if you want to look at something other than planets, you have a couple options. The first is if you just click the hamburger icon, there are some kind of groups or databases that are ready to go. One of them happens to be constellations. So if I click on constellations, StarryNet is going to list all of the constellations for me here. And if I want to turn one on, like, I don't know, Draco, all I have to do is check it there. So if you're going to be showing a lot of constellations and you don't know exactly where they are, and you don't want to do individual searches for each one, just bring up the constellations list here and just kind of go through and find the ones that you want. So if I also want Gemini or Hydra, I can do as many of those as I want. All right, now here's a little bit of an advanced question. Is drawing the stick figure in the label right now, what might be causing that? Or where would I look, or where do you think I should look if I wanted to change what it's drawing? Let's say I also want the illustration to come on when I turn on these individual constellations. So I don't want all the illustrations to come on, but when I turn, say, Draco on and off, I also want to see the illustration pop on. Where in Starry Night do you think I might look? Options, Paul says. Yes, very good. So if we look at options, remember we looked at constellations yesterday. And if I just go and turn illustrations on, what will we see? Let's see the constellation, the illustrations just for Draco, Gemini, and Hydra. No, I'm going to see them for everything, right? But if you look under auto-identify, so if we expand auto-identify, don't need to turn auto-identify on, but just expand it, you'll notice there's another group that's pretty much the same as what we have out here. There's show boundary, show illustration, show name, show stick figure. And what we have turned on right now for those is show name and show stick figure, which is exactly what we're seeing for individual constellations. Right? So if I turned on show illustration, what do you think we should see? Should just see those three illustrations turn on. So now any new constellations that I want to turn on, like Leo, will turn on with the illustration, the name, and the stick figure showing. Make sense? So the constellation options, the ones that aren't indented, these are turning everything on and off, which you might want to do sometimes, right? But if you want individual constellations to look a certain way, that's what the indented ones are for. So you're still changing it in options, like I covered before, and it's affecting then individual ones that you're turning on and off. Make sense? So if I want the name to be off of those, boom. And I could come back here and I can turn all the constellations off, but the hotkey for that is Control Y. So Control Y will turn off, anything that you've labeled on the dome on Starry Night. So if you have, some star labels or constellations up there, Control Y just kind of clears all those out. So it's a quicker way if you have a lot of stuff up there and you want everything to go off at once, Control Y. It'll be your friend. All right. So a little bit of advice here. If you know, like say you're making your favorites and at some point you're going to be turning your constellations on. You're going to have, a few constellations that you want to talk about for that evening, and you want them to turn on and look a certain way. When you're making your favorite, just go in here and say, let's say all you want is the stick figure. That's the way you want your constellations to come up as you turn them on one at a time. Well, you could, when you're making your favorite, just make sure that show stick figure is turned on here. You're not going to see anything until you actually turn constellations on, but when you do, they will show the stick figure only. So you're saving an option that's not, you're not going to see it right away when you load your favorite, but it's ready to go when you get to that point in your lesson. Make sense? So not everything, when you're making your favorite, not everything is going to be in your face visible that you're going to use. A lot of things that you're going to set, and it will make it very helpful for you, are going to be things in the background that you don't have to then think about in the middle of your lesson. Because it's a lot easier when you're doing a show and you want to go to turn on the constellation to not have to think about, oh yeah, let me go in here and make sure it's only stick figure before I turn the constellation on. You just want to turn your constellation on, right? Or if you want to, you're zooming in to say, a specific nebula that you want to talk about. You want to make sure that image database is turned on, right? If you want to see the Hubble image, you just make sure that Hubble images is turned on and saved into your favorite, so that when you zoom into whatever nebula you want to look at, you don't have to think about, oops, yeah, turn Hubble images on. It's already on, so you'll see it. So anything, as you're making your favorites, anything that you think you might want to do, go ahead and bake that into your favorite ahead of time, and you'll save yourself a lot of work, especially when you get to ATM4 automation. This can save you a lot of time of adding in extra commands and whatnot into your automated show if you have it in Starry Night and it's just turning something on or off. So highly recommend, and you'll get better at that as you go along of knowing kind of, yeah, for this favorite I know I'm going to at one point want to do XYZ. Set it up ahead of time, and you'll thank yourself after your show. And then the last thing, I mentioned it briefly already. This, and actually all of these are all search fields. So instead of constellations, I could just search for Auriga. And Starry Night is going to look through its entire database and give me every single hit that happens to have Auriga in there. Now it's going to give you the top hit, which is what it thinks you want, which in this case, yeah, that's the constellation that I want. But it's also giving me all these different objects, all these stars that are part of that have Auriga in it. And if nebulae, anything that has whatever you put in there, it's going to give you that list there. So if you want to, you're searching for a specific nebula or something, this might be the fastest way to do it, is to search through that and then just toggle it on with the checkbox that shows up. And then to get back to kind of the default list, just go back to planets, and I have my list showing back up there. Okay, makes sense? All right, I've been talking way too long. So Steve, if you could share the next exercise, and I will stop my screen share.
No.
We will, I can share it if you need me to, Steve.
I got it.
All right. So go ahead and spend a few minutes working on that, and then Steve will jump in and lead us through the answers.
I'll make some stuff up. Due to time constraints, I think I'm going to start here and try and finish this up so we're on time here. So I'm now going to switch my screen share over to pre-flight, and I'm going to walk through this with y'all. So planets and planet orbits. This is something I do quite often. And I don't know if Brad showed this. I don't think he did, but a quick way to do this is quick and dirty. If you click on the first one, so this would turn on the planet's name, right? So I'm asking for label and their orbits, and just I'm holding down my left click, and I'm going to drag my mouse over the rest of these and then let go. Oh, it didn't work that time, of course. So if I do it a little quicker, you'll see that it will just automatically do all the ones. So it's helping me out a little bit when they're all in a row. If I do this, it makes it a lot easier. So if I was going to go do the orbits, instead of having to click on each one, I just click, drag, and let go. If you miss one or two, I'll cry later about it. It just helps get them up there quicker. So now what I've done is I put on all the labels, I put on all the orbits, and I can see all the planets up there on my preview screen. And I can look around and I can see all the labels, and you can advance time, or you can just do this. Doing Control D, get me to nighttime so you can see things a little bit better. Individual constellations. I'm going to press the home button, reset everything, set the time to 11 p.m. So a real easy way to do that is just click on the AM, go right to PM. That will help out. And then using the Find pane, or the planets up here, search for Scorpius and turn the constellation on. So I'm just going to get rid of that. And of course, have Scorpius old in here. So if I click on this box right here, it will label Scorpius for me, and we can see it pop up on your preview screen. And if you're into telling people about the constellations, you can always tell them that Scorpio lost its claws to Libra. We have a whole little mini lesson about that. Finally, I have look for M16. I always have one student, clearly they're like that 12-year-old, and they know more than I do in the class. And they're always asking to see things that I just don't expect them to look for. It happens like every show. There's always someone who's a lot smarter than I am. It's not very hard. So all you have to do is come in here and type in the object name, which is really nice. Now, on your machines, depending on how fast they are, this can take a little time to populate. So I like to talk about things while it's trying to populate the 8,000 objects that might have M16 in the name, which is really nice, but also sometimes it can take a while. So now if you just click on this, I can get M16 to be labeled. And if you want to, I don't know, Brad, if this is something later on, if I'm jumping ahead, but I'll at least give you a little hint. If you right click on these objects, or if you click on these hamburgers next to them, you can do all kinds of things with them. So if you want to click on that, if I wanted to center it, if I wanted to zoom in on it, so we'll get to that later, I'm sure. But right clicking is a nice way to like, what's the next step? The student has asked about it and I want to take it to the next level. There's some options that you'll have with a lot of the objects. So that's everything for that lesson. Brad, I'm going to turn it back over to you, but I imagine we're going to take a little break here.
Yeah, we are set for a 10-minute break. So we'll get going again at 12 Eastern in 10 minutes. So, I'm going to mute myself and turn my video off and go take a break, but we'll get going in 10 minutes. So see everyone then.